All right.
All right.
And good morning, I'm Vicki Unger. I'm with the Ohio Jury Management Association. Welcome. And our judges will introduce themselves, but I'd like for you all to introduce yourselves. And just say your name and what's your favorite activity at school? Other than We the People, which we know is your favorite. What's your other favorite, second favorite activity?
Hello, I am Drew Bogolaji, and my favorite activity at school is math.
Hello, I'm Samuel Hazlitt. My favorite activity at school is history.
Hello, my name is Christopher Gall, and I like history.
Hello, my name is Aureen Vedi, and my favorite activity at school is doing math tests.
My name is Shashank Bossetti, and I like playing tennis.
My name is Keegan Helpenstein. My favorite activity is science.
Wow. Thank you. Wow. Judges?
I think I like recess.
Have a seat. You can
Although, do you still have it in middle school? I'm not sure about that. So I am Dr. Margot Lambert. I'm from your neck of the woods. I teach at University of Cincinnati Blue Ash College. So, hey, Cincinnati.
My name is Genevieve Hoffman. I work at the Ohio Industrial Commission, which is the adjudicative arm of workers' compensation. I train hearing officers how to adjudicate workers' compensation disputes.
My name is John Bidmore. I'm an attorney. I practice. I have an office here in Columbus. I practice in Ohio, Tennessee, and Arizona, and I also am an adjunct professor here at Columbus State.
I forgot to mention I teach history, so American history. So we are going to go with question 2. So according to the founders, what are major characteristics that a constitution or higher law should have? And why are these characteristics essential to the protection of our natural rights? How would you define a constitution? Under what conditions does a constitution serve as a higher law? What is the difference between a government with a constitution and a constitutional government? Oops, I'm on the wrong question. I'm going to do it again and remove it. Oops.
This is our first round. So.
Just testing you guys.
Plus, check plus right there. Okay, the founders were concerned with how to preserve a republican form of government. According to the framers, what was republican government? What led the framers to establish a republican form of government? What weaknesses did the framers think would lead to the failure of a republican government? And how did the framers think these weaknesses could be prevented? Do you think the framers' solutions were correct? Why or why not?
When the framers established a Republican form of government, which was a form of government in which citizens vote to elect representatives, who in turn vote and make decisions that can affect the lives of citizens, they learned about government by reading Greek and Roman democracies and books about politics, mainly from philosophers and emperors such as Cincinnatus.
The framers recognized for the government to flourish, its citizens and representatives should be working together in the common good, and its citizens must demonstrate civic virtue.
They wanted to make a republic because they believed the government should be a servant, not the master of the people, and the people should have a say in the government.
Since direct democracy took too long, as seen with the Greeks, the framers soon settled on a republic since it offered many benefits such as
The representatives are elected to serve the common good. They also make laws more effective, and the people have a say in their government. Some aspects of the government the framers copied from the ancient Greeks and Romans was the separation of power.
When the last Roman king, Lucius Superbus, raped a noble woman, Brutus, a Roman aristocrat, led to a revolt to overthrow the king. When successful, it was decided that it was too dangerous to concentrate power in the hands of one person, and thus the power was divided into
The legislative branch, which was the Senate, executive branch, which was made up of the two consuls, and the judicial branch, which had a praetor who acted like a judge.
the framers established a republic to make sure no one official abused their power and the people had a say in the government. When the framers thought of a government, they looked to many examples such as the Greek and Roman governments, The framers had learned that in an Athenian direct democracy, every citizen voted directly on all bills and legislation.
In the Roman Empire, the citizens elected leaders to represent them, and thus citizens and leaders worked together to promote common good, and that the citizens set aside their personal interests and worked to achieve greater things for their community. But alas, the Roman Empire had fallen because of the rampant corruption, loss of civic virtue, and among the leaders and citizens, and many tribes invaded the Roman Empire.
The framers didn't exactly copy the Greek and Roman democracy because it had too many flaws, such as the Athenian direct democracy. Every citizen had to vote every issue, and it took way too long. Thus, this could slow down the country's progress.
Meanwhile, in the Roman Republic democracy, it had almost everything, such as the separation of powers and a document similar to the Bill of Rights, the 12 tablets, which were 12 stone tablets that set the laws that couldn't be changed. The one main disadvantage the founders saw was the ability of councils elected by the Senate to take absolute control of the country in time of war.
The framers knew that if a corrupt official rose to power and took control of the government, it would be catastrophic, and they thus did add it to their new republic.
The framers knew that a republican government had many disadvantages, like it only worked best in small colonies. Because of this, the colonists deferred vastly in values and money. That could lead to the colonists forming factions, and the framers didn't want a strong central government which could abuse its power.
According to us, the founders thought that these weaknesses of Republican government were, and thus they implemented solutions to prevent them, but many solutions didn't work.
For example, the framers feared that the Republican government could only work best in small colonies, so to solve that issue, colonial legislators, who were considered to be voices of the people, were supposed to live in the districts that they represented as to not lose touch with the people and their needs.
This solution helped with the problem that in 1776, colonists, which had often the British Parliament legislators, didn't live in the colonies that they represented, and so often that they had little understanding of the needs of the constitutions, but it didn't help with the problem of people dividing into factions.
In Washington's farewell speech, he warned about the political parties. However,
You can finish this farewell
Yes,
speech.
finish yourself.
may now and then answer the ends. They are likely in the course of the time and things to become political engines. Okay.
Okay, I will. So for example, how is the common welfare promoted in a Republican form of government?
So the common welfare was taught among the citizens in schools, and it was preached everywhere, in churches and schools.
They also, in the welfare of for the republic, they would make everyone believe that how they did it was correct. So it made it easier for them to have new representatives and changing out how people thought. So it was easy for our government to not become corrupted.
Would you favor a direct democracy over a representative democracy, and why or why not?
I would favor direct democracy over public democracy because every citizen has the right to have their say about a government issue, whereas in a republic democracy, a government leader could make a decision that is not benefiting the whole country or nation.
I would not favor the direct democracy over the Republican government because a direct democracy, like every citizen, since every citizen has to vote on the issue, some citizens might not be very well informed of the other issues, and they thus might vote wrong. And it also takes way too long for the citizens to vote on every issue, and that could slow down the country's progress.
As you mentioned, it was in ancient Greece that was a problem, right?
Yes.
If you guys had to explain to somebody who did not know what a Republican form of government is, how would you explain to them what it is?
I would explain it by if you have a group of people, and instead of everybody voting on it, they would nominate one person of their group, which means they would put them as the leader. And then the leader would go off to meet with the other leaders of the other groups, and then they would decide on decisions that would either benefit or non-benefit the other groups.
One of the terms for an American is a citizen, as compared to in England, where a lot of the colonists, not, by then, not as many colonists, I studied Germans in early America, but they, in England, are called subjects. What were Americans, the founders, the framers, trying to get at when they used the term citizen versus subject?
Subjects are usually under control of the government and the monarchy, but the citizens have equal rights. They have the rights to vote and the rights to life, liberty, and protection of property.
Natural rights,
The
nice.
citizens have more rights than the subjects, so they like almost like social classes.
Yeah, and how is the government is controlled by what, but of the citizen?
The government is controlled by the wills and the wishes of the citizens.
Well, in the subjects, they have no control over what happens.
Yes, and it sounds like it, right? More subject to lower subordinate. Yeah, nice.
If you guys want to start a government at your school, would you follow the Republican, would you follow the Republican form of government at your school, or would you use a different model? Why or why not?
A Republican government would work easier because the classes would vote on an official that would go up and work for it. Meanwhile, the direct would not, or in most other governments, because if we have one person leading, that everybody's so different in schools nowadays that it wouldn't work at all. Like, even it gets, as you get to different schools, it would be bigger and bigger. So if you would stick to one school, it might work, but if you would ever expand your school to a larger size, it would start falling apart.
If it was according to me, the government, I would make it a Republican form of government because because everyone can vote on the issue, and I would make the candidates students because sometimes the students will know how it's like to walk in the shoes of their fellow students. So thus it will be more equal.
How do you, in a Republican form, how do the representatives vote for the people? Should they vote what they think is best, or how should they go about voting the will of the people? How would they determine that?
So when the representatives run for Congress, when they run for important positions, they set their goals and they tell the people their goals. And if the people like their goals and wishes, then they will proceed to vote for them.
What about the people who are not, say a majority vote, but you have say 51%, awkward number, and 49% choose not to vote for this person. This person gets elected. What about that 49%? How are their wishes met, dealt with?
Maybe the person who got voted, he might change some rules, also helps them.
He would attempt to make them like him more so that he has a better chance of getting voted around next time.
And he will make sure they will make sure there's a compromise between both of the groups, so both parties are happy.
Because 51% is not much of a majority, and so yeah, it's pretty close to even. Good.
Time is up.
I guess my bit of advice overall, I thought you guys knew the issues really well. I'm really impressed. I don't think as a junior high student I had this ability, but that you guys are showing here today. One thing I would say, and I just there, is you get nervous when you speak, especially in the beginning when you first speak. Like when I first started teaching college, I was pretty nervous, and nowadays I'm kind of like, South Park joke. But back then I was pretty nervous, and kind of the more you get used to it, the more you practice, especially in front of other people, your fellow students, and kind of be measured in your speaking and clear in your speaking, that will get better, okay? And just as I messed up in the beginning, we all mess up, even now as a professor. So, but I would just recommend practicing that just to get used to it, feel more comfortable.
Yeah, thank you for your advice.
I'd echo the same sentiment. I thought you guys did a great job. You're very well prepared. So it is just working a little on the presentation, but you guys did fantastic. Good job, especially being the first round of the morning.
Good point.
Yeah, I think you guys did an excellent job too. This isn't meant as a criticism because I think you guys did an excellent job altogether. You had a large group. and going through the, especially the opening remarks, it was almost like picking up mid-sentence. And to me, that was a little bit hard to track a little bit. But like I said, it's not a criticism, that's just something to say. And then the one thing, also not a criticism, but a suggestion on opening remarks, or just anytime you're talking, just restate, like, you know, we're going through the questions, just restate, this is the question we're answering. It makes the listener a little bit easier to follow along, sort of like if you're writing a paper or something, you use headings, kind of that headings to reset everybody. Maybe it was just me, but I had a little bit of trouble kind of sometimes following it. But content-wise, you guys knew your stuff. I felt like we could ask really tough questions for you guys, and you can answer them. That's ultimately the main point. So, good work.
Yeah. Very nice.
Policy is
Ashna, do the name cards actually pronounce your names
Oh, just the ladies, okay.
I always start.
All rise.
Please be seated. Welcome to this committee hearing for Unit 2. My name is Stan Bialchuk. I'll be the chairman. My co-judges here can introduce themselves.
My name is Jerry Fosman. I'm an Assistant Attorney General with the Ohio Attorney General's Office in the Criminal Justice Section.
Jeffrey Sherman, I do taxes.
And I am also a mostly retired tax attorney. So, could you introduce yourselves, please?
Yes, my name is Arushi Sharma. I'm Nancy Kanchi. I'm Ashna Prakash. I'm Pranav Mittal. I'm Elena Del Silva. I'm Aditi Lila. And our teachers are Mr. Hammer and Mr. Guru.
Okay. Very good. We are going to be using question 1 for Unit 2. I will read the question, and then you can present your prepared remarks, and then we'll have some follow-up questions for you. So if you're ready, big breath. Speak loudly to us, slowly and clearly, okay? Question 1, despite its weaknesses, the Articles of Confederation made lasting contributions to American government. Do you agree with that assessment? Why or why not? What were some achievements of Congress under the Articles of Confederation? What shortcomings did many founders see in the Articles? And what arguments could you have made in support of the Articles?
There were many achievements of Congress under the Articles of Confederation. The legislative branch was founded underneath the Articles and provided a base for future lawmaking. At the time, the government was powerful enough to secure the American people's rights and organize the nation to address the needs of all the citizens. The Articles were also able to keep the United States from breaking apart because of the amount of power the states had.
Moreover, the Articles of Confederation created the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 to establish new states and split up territory, another key event in the founding of America. In Article 4, it states that the Northwest Territory and future territories shall be common highways and forever free, as well to the inhabitants and as of the said territory as the citizens of the United States. The Northwest Ordinance managed to establish and expound that this territory would be given all of the same rights and liberty among other states.
A shortcoming that the founders discovered in the Articles of Confederation was the amount of independent freedom that the states had. The rights that each state had often caused confusion among states and officials as residents traveled from state to state. Jonathan Elliott writes in Elliott's Debates that a man in Virginia could lose a horse in North Carolina and never get it back. Another profound shortcoming was the weakness of the federal government. Because the states were so powerful under the document, Congress was incapable of enforcing laws onto the American people. For instance, they were unable to order a state to collect taxes and relied on donations from citizens. This made it hard to maintain efforts.
Furthermore, arguments between states arose, and a lack of a national court system made it difficult to resolve conflict. States had to conduct their own trials, making bias a big factor. There was no system to settle disagreement among states, so the disagreements rarely ended up being solved. One of the largest weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation was that Congress was unable to enforce its own laws. States were ultimately able to decide whether their citizens would abide by national laws. This gave the states far too much freedom in the government and eventually came to be very futile to try to implement certain laws because of the state's inability to obey the national government.
Even Alexander Hamilton, an outspoken Federalist, claimed that, to maintain tranquility, a government must be respectful. Even to observe neutrality, you must have a strong government. To summarize what Hamilton stated, having a strong government will give to a rise in neutrality and peace within the country and its people. An example of the effects of lacking a strong government was Shays' Rebellion, a violent revolt in Massachusetts led by farmers. The farmers were being taxed unfairly by the state, which led to an uprising. This made people realize that without a strong central government to oversee states' actions, these revolts would continue.
Another significant problem was that it became very difficult to pass laws and amendments efficiently. In order to amend the Articles of Confederation, all 13 states needed to approve the decision. Coming to an agreement unanimously and gathering in a specified location was often time-consuming and arduous, mainly due to geography and the means of travel at the time. In addition, Congress was not able to regulate trade between states and foreign countries. Disputes broke out across states, and trading with other areas became strenuous, because there were lots of different currencies within the colonies and various countries at the time.
Although the Articles had many flaws, it was also highly beneficial for the United States because under this Constitution, America was able to maintain a non-tyrannical government. People were afraid of the changes that the Articles would bring. They did not want an oppressive government similar to when Britain was ruling over them, so they were reasonably skeptical of the Articles of Confederation and the power of law.
For instance, states under the Articles of Confederation were able to make their own tariffs, amend laws, declare war, and keep their own army and navy. However, the national government was still able to retain some of its powers to balance the control that the federal government and the states had, such as Congress being allowed to deal with international affairs and propose congressional departments. In conclusion, we believe that the Articles of Confederation, although having a multitude of flaws, was an essential document that set the limitations of government for the first time in American democracy.
Okay, very good. We will now have some follow-up questions. Were individual rights more secure under the Articles than they were under British rule? Why or why not? Were individual rights more secure under the Articles than they were under British rule?
I believe that underneath the Articles of Confederation, individuals had so much more rule and more freedom, because under the Articles of Confederation, they had some representation in their government. State governments did have a Congress of their own, plus the National Congress, which did have members from each state. Each state was fairly represented, in my opinion, in the Congress, which was nationally represented. In Britain, the subjects were not as well represented because Britain did not have any representatives from the U.S. to come and meet in their parliament or in their government. This made it hard for Britain, and this made it hard for the U.S. to really be fairly treated by the King of Britain when they were not being able to voice their opinions in the government.
And when this happened, the colonists felt that they needed to revolt because they felt like they didn't have a say in their own government. So that's why they made the Articles of Confederation, where the subjects had more say.
What under the Articles do you think gave them more freedom than they would have under British rule? Was there something specific you can cite to?
Well, in the Articles, the states had more rights, so the rights could be specialized to their own citizens. For instance, if a certain tariff, if the citizens did not want the tariff to be especially high, the state could make it so that the tariffs were low, and the federal government did not have a say in that.
The federal government also didn't have a say in taxes. They weren't allowed to tax the states and the people generally, so the states were allowed to decide whether or not they wanted to have taxes. You had to ask. The federal government was allowed to request taxes, but they weren't allowed to actually forcefully come and take the taxes, which gave the states a lot more power.
As opposed to what under British law?
You had to pay the taxes or else you might go to jail or you could get your land taken away.
What kind of taxes did the British impose that the colonists didn't like?
British imposed several acts, such as the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, the Navigation Act, which basically banned trade with the world, where the colonists couldn't even trade.
So the Intolerable Acts were acts which really angered the colonists because they wanted to be represented in the British government, and without being able to do that, they were angry that they didn't have a voice in their own government and the taxes which they were paying. And in our current government, we value how we can have our own say in our government and which taxes we pay and the laws that we have to abide by.
I don't want to hog all the time, my co-judge here.
Do you think the framers were justified in creating a new constitution, and would it have been possible to amend the articles to fix their shortcomings?
I think they were justified because, as we mentioned in our speeches, there were so many negative parts of the Articles of Confederation, such as, states were almost like independent countries, which made it hard for the United States to act as a united and a unified country as a whole. States were able to create their own currency, have state religions, have their own courts, have their own systems, raise their own taxes. I believe that because of this separation, it became very hard for the citizens to really interact from different states. Like we mentioned earlier, if you lost a horse in Virginia, you couldn't get it back. So I think that it was necessary for the Constitution to create the United States of America and not the separate territories of America.
I agree, but I also think that the articles were a good start to a government that would include the people's rights and representation. So I think that that's what really gave them a start to making the Constitution.
While the Articles were a good start, I think that the idea of unity, which was expressed in the Constitution very well, was important because the states were so independent that if the country as a whole was attacked or had a fight to win altogether, it would have been very futile. Their attempts would have been very futile to try to do it all together because each state had their own military and were able to control it themselves. So the idea of unity and all coming together for a cause was very important.
As Nancy said earlier, the articles would have been very hard to amend, mainly because the means of travel at the time, it was very hard to get and meet at a specific place. So it would have been hard to amend, so they were able to make a new constitution, which was easier to, I guess, pass new laws and make changes to it.
As I recall, the articles only allowed for a Congress. It didn't allow for an executive branch or a judicial branch. Is that good or bad? What's your opinion? I just want your opinion.
I think that's a bad idea because even though everyone's at the same level, I think there definitely needs to be an authority, branches of government that basically manage the whole thing. So not checks and balances, so one branch doesn't get too much power.
Also, this is important because Congress was made to create laws, but the executive branch is meant to enforce the laws and the judicial branch is meant to interpret the laws. When you leave it up to the states, as Panati said, it becomes a matter of political bias and also state bias. So it is necessary to have a federal government which can interpret the laws, unbiased, with the help of the executive branch which enforces the laws.
Yeah, adding on to that, it's kind of the idea of checks and balances because you need the branches to balance each other out and enforce laws and check them.
What was Shays' Rebellion?
Shays' Rebellion was a farmers' revolt because taxes after the war were very heavy and they were not being accustomed to the state's needs and the individual area's needs, and some farmers were being taxed really heavily and they were going into a lot of debt, which meant that they had to go into debtor's prison, and a lot of their land was taken away, which meant that they almost had no jobs and no money to work off of, which really hurt their families and their lives altogether.
Thank you. Our time is up. We will provide you some feedback.
You all did a great job. You definitely know your stuff. It's clear you are prepared. I'd say with the prepared remarks, perhaps remember to slow down because I know you know it and I know we got it prepared, but we need to hear it. Sometimes some of you were going a little fast, and the fact that you knew your stuff, some of you jumped in, but each of you gave leeway to the other and supported each other and had bolstering points. So it all worked out great, and I commend you.
I guess I misunderstood the rules to this. I thought that the students were supposed to be up here and the teachers were supposed to be here. But apparently we have teachers on this panel. You folks were excellent. You had good presentations, thorough answers. As my co-judge said, you obviously know the material. Very impressive. Slow down is about the only critique I can give you with regard to your presentations. Just slow it down. Because if you speak too fast, then you can't understand what the person's saying, and they don't really communicate with the person, then do you? But if you slow down, then you can communicate with the person, and they can understand what you're saying. That's really the only particular. You guys were very good, terrific.
Yeah, I'm going to also echo the slow down, but also you have to be careful when you're giving your spontaneous remarks. Avoid saying like, da-da-da, like, da-da-da, like, you know. Don't say like and you know. It's a vocal pause. It's not necessary. First of all, if I knew, I wouldn't be here, right? So otherwise, we're going to. And by the way, I like the use of the word arduous. I thank you. I learned from you all. Thank you so much.
All right, that concludes our committee hearing. Yes, we did. We sure did. Stand
Please be seated. My name is Paul Cox. I'm an attorney from Central Ohio.
My name is Jane Hubbard, and I'm a teacher and mock trial and moot court coach.
I'm Leslie Hamilton. I'm also a teacher and a mock trial coach.
Would you guys introduce yourselves, please?
Absolutely. My name is Daniel Ronas-Tobin.
My name is Thomas Brinkman.
Hi, I'm Davey Shee.
Kevin Kim.
Hi, I'm Arun Kanak.
I'm Nikita Hyken, and our teachers are Mr. Hammer and Mr. Booth.
And we all agree we are here on the third question,
Yes.
correct? Everybody's on the same page. All right.
The third question or the second?
Unit 3. I'm sorry, I phrased that badly. Unit 3.
No improvising.
Yeah, question you never heard before. Unit 3. In Federalist 70, Alexander Hamilton argued, quote, energy in the executive is a leading character in the definition of good government. It is essential to the protection of the community against foreign attacks. It is not less essential to the steady administration of laws, unquote. Do you agree or disagree with Hamilton, and why? How does the Constitution both empower and limit the executive branch? What arguments were discussed in the Constitutional Convention and ratification debates about the power of the executive branch? Are they relevant today? Why or why not? And is the use of executive orders consistent with democratic principles and values? Why or why not? You may begin.
Energy in the executive can become fatal to a successful democracy because it essentially establishes an autocrat as the head of the government. In Hamilton's context, he was somewhat content with having a king, even after the war with Britain. In 1831, when the Cherokee Nation sued the state of Georgia for attempting to force them off their land, the case was taken all the way up to the Supreme Court. As Andrew Jackson addressed the Cherokee, "My friends, circumstances render it impossible that you can flourish. You have but one remedy within your reach, and that is to remove to the west. And the sooner you do this, the sooner you will commence with your career of improvement and prosperity."
Jackson dismissed the court's ruling and had challenged them to enforce it. The natives were pushed off their land anyway, despite the outcome of the trial. The government will be corrupt with no one enforcing laws or putting them into action. The executive power is also the branch in charge of the military, so if the executive abuses this power, the country would become a more dangerous place to live.
Though the Articles of Confederation didn't outline an executive branch, eventually the delegates found it essential to create certain executives for purposes like foreign affairs and management of the treasury. They needed at least a stronger central government to prevent the collapse of the country. However, the framers didn't want to allow the president to become too powerful in fear of America turning into a dictatorship. The Constitution empowers the executive branch by giving it the power of the military,
Only executive powers have the speed to almost instantly implement safeguards against such foreign and domestic violence. An example of this was during Shays' Rebellion when President Washington led the military into the town where all the farmers revolted. He threatened to wage war against them and ultimately stopped the rebellion. Though Congress has the right to declare war, it has been ignored. Presidents also have the power of executive orders, but Congress can overrule them by passing laws that will limit what the president can do.
The president also has the right to negotiate treaties, but the Senate can deny any approval decisions. The Senate must approve all court nominations as well. This practice of approval from the Senate is called advice and consent. Another example of a limit on the executive branch is impeachment. When Congress impeaches a president or brings it up to trial on serious charges, the president can be found guilty or removed from office. Though this has only happened twice, once with Bill Clinton and the other with Andrew Johnson, it is still a check on the executive power from Congress. In cases regarding laws and executive orders, the judicial branch remains the final deciding factor whether they are constitutional. In this sense, the executive branch can never be an absolute power with the existence of the judiciary.
One debate the framers had over the president, what they would call this executive, is whether the president can veto laws. The delegates came to a quick decision. The president can veto laws, but is subject to a two-thirds override in both houses of the legislature. This is most definitely relevant today, as important bills are still very often proposed and can be vetoed by opposing presidents, such as when President Nixon vetoed a bipartisan bill on universal child care. Many anti-federalists saw the list of the president's powers and felt threatened. They also noted the broad nature of Article 2 compared to Article 1. They also felt that the citizens' rights weren't granted and suggested the addition of a Bill of Rights. The Federalists complied in 1791. However, the Federalists also argued that the executive wasn't too powerful because it had separation of powers, checks and balances, and limited government.
Something else that was also debated was executive orders. Executive orders, however, are not quite consistent with democratic values, since only the president's consent is needed to pass them. They do not have to go through any large group of elected bodies to pass, and there doesn't even need to be any debate on it. As long as it is in the power of the executive order, any order can be passed. Its only repercussion for the president is perhaps a slightly lower approval rating. Though it is subject to the scrutiny of the courts and can be shot down, that doesn't stop the president from passing them. For example, in late January of this year, Donald Trump passed one of the most controversial executive orders of the time. He barred immigration from 7 Middle Eastern and East African countries. The idea of the ban, as well as the implication, was widely criticized on both sides.
The time has expired for your presentation.
Can we finish our sentence?
Or finish your sentence.
Executive orders of our time. In conclusion, too much or too little power on the executive can
How and why did the founders' colonial history, in other words, their view of what had happened in the 200 or so years since the Europeans came to America, influence their thinking about the executive branch?
Well, they had constantly been being subjected to large amounts of power by the European monarchies and autocratic systems. So they figured to put a lot of checks and balances onto the executive to prevent that from ever happening in the United States, for that was essentially why they had rebelled from their colonial overlords in Britain.
I agree that the premise of the United States of America was to get away from British rule because they were being tyrannical and not giving any freedom or power to any of the citizens in the U.S. Therefore, breaking away from Britain, but still having a tyrannical law and order would not be good and would not be right, and it wouldn't guarantee the laws or rights of the citizens. Therefore, that's why I agree with that.
Alexander Hamilton specifically talks about the energy in the executive as a leading character in the definition of good government. In what ways do you think the energy of the executive, and in particular the chief executive, is beneficial to our system of government, and in which ways is it detrimental?
Well, it is very much detrimental in the fact that one person can have too much influence over a country and cannot be stopped in its amount of power, meaning it cannot be checked if it has too much energy to say. One way it could be beneficial, though, is that, like in Congress,
it takes a very long time to make a decision because everyone has to vote and they have to debate everything. But with one executive president, there is only one person to be decisive and make a decision, and thus the majority of the country with the election will stand behind his decision.
An executive can be necessary to guard against foreign and internal threats, as mentioned. And having too little executive power can also lead to a situation that could have occurred with the Articles of Confederation should the War of 1812 scenario kicked off under the Articles of Confederation. The states wouldn't be able to unite and everything would fall apart.
I believe I heard the phrase that the executive orders were not quite consistent with democratic principles in opening, and yet John Locke and others contended that the chief executive must be able to exercise extraordinary power if needed to protect and preserve the nation. So how do you justify the two positions there?
So if you look at one side, it's giving power to the president to, the president's job is to represent the people of the United States, but giving power to the president is to secure that in a national threat or in a time of danger, that our rights could be secured and our rights cannot be taken away. In times of war, that right, and that, because coming to the decision very quickly is hard as a Congress, but a president can do it quickly and right away. Like President Obama sent 14 executive orders on his first week, correct? So in that way, that's helpful, but in another way, if the president's views are skewed from the people, and the president's not doing what the people wants, then that becomes a problem.
He can use his executive orders to then turn himself into more of an autocrat instead of a representative of the people.
And as shown earlier this January when Trump put in place the ban on immigration, it took such a long time for the judicial branch to rule against the order that the order had already expired by that point in time. So an order can be short enough that it gives the president enough power for the amount of time he needs.
And at that point, it had already done the international damage that many had feared.
Do you think that presidential power depends upon public support?
Yes, because executive power is still, people vote for representatives in Congress and they can impeach the president. So if times are very bad, the Congress can impeach the president if he is corrupt. So ultimately, the president's power is still within the hands of the people.
I believe that it's not really dependent on the will of the people because you elect him for 4 years, and in that time much can happen, and his views will likely become skewed by then. And you can always elect him out, but during the time he is in power, he does not have to abide by the people.
It was upside down.
First of all, very, very nicely done. We know how difficult it is to do the preparation and then to get up here in this sort of strange setting and have a strange conversation. You guys did an excellent job. Your preparation was evident. I really liked how you were able to present a balance. Anytime you had an argument, you offered a counter argument or you showed the other side, which was really nice. Make sure that you are listening to each other. You're sharing the answer and the workload really well, but make sure that you're really listening to each other. But apart from that, it was a fantastic presentation.
I was so impressed that you were doing this with 6 in 4 minutes. That's a challenge to make it equitable and to make sure that you can get to the end. And I was impressed, Nikita, with the way that you said in conclusion and slipped in your last when it was over the time. That was quick thinking to indicate that I am wrapping up. I just have to finish this, and I liked that. I was also impressed with the specificity of your examples. from the very opening on through, you supported it so clearly. And that way we didn't have to ask you some of those questions that we'd like to see. Well, how does that relate? Because we learned that from you in your presentation. So very impressive.
Again, to support my colleagues' comments, the art of argument is not just making your point in terms of principles that you may believe or principles that you've learned, but also supporting that argument, that point, with evidence. And I thought you all did a very good job in doing that. That's the whole point. I mean, believing X or Y or Z is one thing, but being able to say, this is why that's true, or that this is why that happened, is very important in making the point and making your argument. And you did a good job of it. Thank you very much.
Please be seated. How are you today?
Good, how are you?
Doing great. Please introduce yourselves to us, and then we'll introduce ourselves, and we'll get going. Please.
I'm Meredith Brinkman.
Yes, and when you're speaking, if you can, speak up, since we don't have microphones and this room is kind of big, so we don't bite, and we don't throw vegetables or fruit.
Not even rotten tomatoes?
No, we're out of that business now.
What's the point of this?
Well, I'll tell you. Just a moment, can you buy a box of tomatoes? About a fun here. Okay, let's start again. Okay. Meredith, is it?
My name is Meredith Brinkman.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Gemma Pooley.
I'm Asia Gabor. I'm Ryan Smith, and our teachers are Mr. Hammer and Mr. Goodman.
Thank you. Thank you. Are you part of the Gabor sisters that were famous on television years ago? I wasn't sure for a second. Okay, my name is Bill Weisenberg. I'm an attorney. For many years, I worked for the Ohio State Bar Association as their lobbyist. Now I'm just a senior policy advisor, and having the pleasure of being with you this morning. And my colleagues will introduce themselves.
Hi, good morning. My name is Michelle Ballinger. I am a gifted and talented resource coordinator for Columbus City Schools and work with many of our schools and teachers in these programs.
And my name is Burl Pickle Antonio. I'm an attorney. I work for the state of Ohio. I've had the pleasure of judging these competitions at the high school level. This is my first time judging middle school students. I have a 7th grader myself, so it's really a pleasure to watch you as 8th graders be so engaged in these topics. So thank you for participating in the program, and thank you to the teachers for providing this opportunity to the kids.
I'm going to read you the question now. And this is
one or
you.
dos?
Pardon?
Uno or dos?
You have to wait.
Oh.
To
I thought I was supposed to ask that. Well, thank you, Your Honor, for deferring to me. It'll be number 2. Okay? But now that you've got me thinking, I might move back and forth between the two and combine. No, I won't do that. In his farewell address, George Washington cautioned his countrymen. There is an opinion that parties in free countries are useful checks upon the administration of the government and serve to keep alive the spirit of liberty. This, within certain limits, is probably true. And in governments of a monarchical caste, patriotism may look with indulgence, if not with favor, upon the spirit of a party. But in those of the popular character, in governments purely elective, it is a spirit not to be encouraged. Do you agree or disagree with Washington's statement? Why? Follow-up, there are 3 parts to this. How and why did the political parties develop despite the objections of Washington and other framers? On balance, do you think that political parties during their more than 200 years of existence have been more helpful or hurtful to the country? And what evidence can you offer in support of your position? Is the two-party system in U.S. politics the best system to represent citizens today? Why and why not? Please proceed.
Okay. There are many ways in how political parties have developed over the years, and even though George Washington and most of the framers had felt that political parties developing in America was a bad thing and that it can be a threat to the government. This was the view that both George Washington and the framers of the Constitution, such as Benjamin Franklin and Alexander Hamilton and all of those people, they had that on the political parties. There are many facts to support how the political parties of the United States have been both good and bad over the past 200 years, and the two-party system is not a good system to be used or to represent the United States. They have been most harmful to the nation and do not represent American citizens in a good way, is what we think.
In his farewell address, George Washington says that political parties can be good, but should not be encouraged. This is true. Even though political parties can be useful in presenting two sides of an argument, they can become dangerous for the US. Washington foresaw this problem that the Federalists, those who followed the ideas of Alexander Hamilton, and the Republicans, those who followed the ideas of Thomas Jefferson, would argue. They were worried that one party would become too powerful and may take over the entire government without the consent of the people. He said, quote, "They may now and then answer popular ends. They are likely in the course of time and things by which cunning, ambitious, and principled men will be able to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of the government. Therefore, these political parties should not have been encouraged, as they can bring a threat to the people of the United States and go against what George Washington and the Constitution framers would have wanted."
Okay. So despite the concern of both of the framers and George Washington, there would always be those who had different views on politics. The political parties started out as Federalists versus Anti-Federalists. Federalists were those who wanted a big government that took control and would set the laws so that everyone would have the same thing. The Anti-Federalists were the ones that wanted a small government, a small local government, so that they would have more freedom to themselves and to the others around them. According to William T. Bianco and David D. Cannon, the term party system is used to describe periods in which the major parties' names, the groups of supporters, and the issues dividing them are all constant. The Federalists were those who supported the ratifying of the Constitution, and the Anti-Federalists did not want the Constitution to be ratified. These two parties soon began debating and having arguments against each other that were about things such as if the Constitution would keep the Republican government and whether the Bill of Rights was needed in the Constitution. However, over time, these views became more distinct, and they fell into one of two categories. Those who wanted a strong federal government with Alexander Hamilton became part of the Federalist Party, and those who wanted a small government went with Thomas Jefferson and they became the Republicans after the Anti-Federalists. These parties grew in size and in difference, and soon it was revealed in the election of 1800 how different they were. Joanne B. Freeman says that the presidential election of 1800 was an angry, dirty, crisis-ridden contest that seemed to threaten the nation's very survival. This was an election that, because of the conflict between the political parties, really tested the United States as a nation. This was definitely not what George Washington had wanted, or the framers of the Constitution.
On balance, political parties have been more harmful to the USA than helpful. Firstly, political parties are more preoccupied on serving the people on their side and making that side better than both of the parties working together in order to benefit the country. Often they have very big arguments and can fight for a very long time. This is enough to scare many newer political people and does not help people get into politics, which is something that the political parties were made to do. Unlike most other parties from around the world, American parties have no single all-powerful leader. Members of Congress can vote however they want. The parties are not ideological coherent. Any American can be a party.
Time. We've run out of time in your presentation, but we're going to catch up on the follow-up questions to you, okay?
Okay.
So I think you have clearly taken the position that you all agree with Washington and that political parties are more harmful than helpful. But I guess I want to ask There's this idea that the party who is not in power has a role in being kind of a watchdog and holding the other party accountable. So can you, I guess, do you agree or disagree with this assessment? And how do you think that works in a system without political parties?
Okay, I would agree, because originally when the government was framed, typically what happened was the winner of the election would be the president, and then the loser, who is typically the opposing side, would go as the vice president, so they checked each other in the system of checks and balances that we had. And the way that it works now, there's still the Congress, which backs the president, and even now both the president and the Congress majority are Republican. There's still members of the Congress that are Democratic, and other examples from our history have said that there's always checks and balances to whatever we do, no matter who is in power or who is working.
One of you's made a comment that there seems to be in essence, a preoccupation with one side versus the other. And maybe maybe the party system is keeping people out of politics, keeping people away from participating. Did I hear that correctly? Is that something that we should be concerned with?
Yes, I believe so, as political parties always having such different views from one another, and sort of battling against one another can often result in, oh, I don't want to be involved in all of this because it could, if I have different views from my friends, we might not be close anymore.
And to further that, debates would ensue between the two, and people just won't want to get in the middle of it, and they won't have to pick a side because people might judge them differently if that happens. And you could just not discuss politics to keep arguments from happening, because the way that the election was this past year, arguments were happening all over the place and with everyone, so people just ended up stopping talking about politics so that they wouldn't have to decide.
How does all of this affect the people, the citizenry? Does this subvert, bring into question the role of the people, we the people? Is this truly in the best interest of we the people, or does it create problems for us?
Well, in some occasions, the political parties can even have their own news stations or newspapers or press rooting for them or potentially against the opposing side, and telling stories a way that will shine light on their side of the story. And this can potentially sway the opinion of people watching or reading the press, so that they don't know everything that's happening, or they only know what certain people want them to know.
But also, if we took the party system away, in human nature, it's to group together and go against each other, so it would still happen, I think, just on a smaller scale. So in the people, they would still have to deal with all of this, just in perhaps some different sorts of ways.
So people who are like-minded and share different thoughts and philosophies will still come together.
Yes.
In some form of groupings or
Yes.
organizations to express their feelings on those issues. Let me, a follow-up question for you. Living in today's environment, do you think the people who are elected in the party system are placing enough importance on the people, or are they placing the party ahead of the interests of the people? Just your thoughts and observations.
I believe that the people are, well, in the political parties, the candidates would place their party over, because power is a huge deal right now. So if they had the chance, they would put themselves in front of the people.
You cited some sources, in your presentation. Can you give us a little more information about those sources? What prompted you to go to those sources?
They had written books and news articles and other stuff about this topic, and so we had researched it, and they had views that were similar to ours, so we sourced them because we're not exactly professionals. So we cited them, saying that professionals agree with us, we're not the only ones that have this information and this opinion.
early on, one of you said something that the parties may not be good for the country. Can you explain a little more why that's the case? Oh, we ran out of time?
We did. It's up to you if you want them to answer that.
Why don't you go ahead and answer that?
Okay.
Maybe a minute or two.
Well, parties can cause like many conflicts between people because they will even like something different, and then you could get into arguments with like your family and your friends because you're in a different party.
So you would still have arguments with people even if, because political parties basically divide the country in half the way that right now that we have a two-party system. So you have two different sections of the continent, and it's not quite the United States anymore. It's the Democrats and the Republicans. Everyone still comes together to vote, but they all have most of them are just black and white different beliefs.
Well, we thank you. My colleagues will offer their observations to you. Any thoughts? And I will conclude.
You gave some good insight and cited sources and backed up your position. You did a good job bringing that forward. Keep thinking about that and going forward. I would like to hear more, actually, but yeah.
I mean, clearly you were very well prepared. I know in the beginning, your responses, you guys ran out of time, and I'm not sure if that, I'm not sure why that happened. I don't know if it was just a timing issue or what, but I guess I would encourage you to run through. I mean, if you choose to participate in this again, that time factor, it's really difficult for all of us. But I would encourage as much practice as possible so that you are aware of the time. I think one of the reasons that you did run out of time is that you all did a really nice job of not just reading from your notes. You did a really great job of making eye contact. I don't know if you prepared with bullets rather than writing things out, but you did a really great job of not reading to us. You all made really good eye contact. So my guess is that that's partly why you did run out of time, and it's a good reason to run out of time, because it is much more effective when you're able to make eye contact and sound conversational rather than reading. But I would just encourage, I guess, more practice, more running through with a timer so that we make sure that we hear from all of you.
Yeah, I shared the thoughts that my colleagues expressed to you about the time. I'll just tell you, a number of years ago I was arguing a case for the Ohio Supreme Court, and the red light went on, and Chief Justice Morris said, "Mr. Weisenberg, your time has run out." I said, "I haven't finished my sentence." He said, "I just said your time ran out." And that happens. And it takes practice. You're all young. This is going to develop over time. You're a great you and your colleagues are a great tribute, because when you look today at the world, we know there's a lot of concern, but with you being the future, I think we can rest comfortably that there's some leaders here and people who are going to make a difference in all of our lives. And we wish you well, and just continue. And continue to practice. I was watching. Some of you have little 3x5 cards there, and that's really good.
Yep.
Because you can put them in a purse or pocket rather than a big binder. And then what it does, quite frankly, is it makes you prepare more, because those cards then become key words. And as my colleague said, then you develop that eye contact. So we wish you really well. We know you're going to do great, and thank you all for doing it.
I'm your presiding judge for Unit 5, so hope everybody's ready for Unit 5. Really. And what we're going to do first is we'll introduce ourselves, the judges, and then we'll ask you to introduce yourselves. So if you'll say your names slowly and make sure we've got a second to catch it, then we'll start with the 4-minute segment and go to the 6-minute question and answer. So I'm Joyce Martin, and I work with a small environmental consulting firm. And I've worked on the Senate Finance Committee, and have done some lobbying there for groups with disabilities and environmental issues. So we're looking forward to working with you today.
I'm Chris Bryant, and I teach law at the University of Cincinnati College of Law.
I'm Tanya McCrary-Williams. I am an instructor here at Columbus State. I teach law in the Paralegal Studies program. I'm also a practicing attorney, a trial attorney, practicing multi-practice cases.
Okay, and we'd like you folks to introduce yourselves in the order you're going to speak, if that's possible.
Hi, my name is Gabby Prada.
My name is Catherine Patina Saladon.
My name is Kyle Goodpaster.
My name is Reagan Becker.
My name is Kathleen Schmidlin. And our teachers are Mr. Hammer and Mr. Greenwood.
I didn't get any.
Okay. Can we run through them one more time?
I'm Gabby Prada.
Catherine Patina Saladon.
Kyle Goodpaster.
Reagan Becker.
Kathleen Schmidlin.
Thank you very much. What we're dealing with today is question 1, and the overall topic is, how does the Constitution protect our basic rights? Question 1, as you 5 people know very well, is how does the right to due process of law protect an individual's right to life, liberty, and property? Why are due process rights protected under both the 5th and 14th Amendments? How would you distinguish between procedural and substantive due process? And how is due process related to natural rights, philosophy, and the principle of limited government? Are there any questions before we start? Okay, 4 minutes are starting.
The right to due process of law protects an individual's rights to life, liberty, and property. Due process of law is the principle that the government must follow established procedures when limiting, taking away, or interfering with the people's rights to life, liberty, or property. Due process states that the government may not act arbitrarily or unpredictably and negatively altering or destroying an individual's individual rights. It also says that both the state and federal government must be just when carrying out their laws.
Due process rights are protected under the 5th and 14th Amendment. The 5th Amendment states that the federal government should not deprive of life, liberty, and property without due process of law. The 14th Amendment specifies towards the actions of a state government, saying, "Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." The court case in Regal, which took place in 1967, shows how the government protects due process laws in juvenile cases. In 1964, the 15-year-old Gerald Gott and a friend were arrested for telephoning a neighbor by the name of Miss Cook and saying obscene and offensive things to her.
They were taken to a detention home where both were questioned, and although they admitted to making the call, neither boy took responsibility for the event. When Galt was arrested, the police officer left no record of the arrest or where he was taking him. When Gerald Galt's mom got home and her son was missing, her older son went out to find him. Once Gerald Galt was found, they were informed of his trial. At both trials, Miss Cook was not present, no record was taken, and no one was sworn to secrecy. Or, to say the truth, Galt was sentenced to 6 years in juvenile detention, whereas the maximum sentence for an adult with the same sentence would only be 2 months and a $50 fine. The Supreme Court reviewed Galt's case and was determined that juvenile facing an adjudication of delinquency or incarceration are entitled to certain procedural safeguards under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment.
Procedural and substantive due process both limit the government's ability to take away or interfere with the people's fundamental rights of life, liberty, and property. Procedural due process requires government officials to take certain steps and act in certain ways before regulating or taking natural rights. This is different from substantive due process,